Ideas. Where do they come from? Do they just spring from some magical place out of the ether? Do they come from the dark recesses of your mind? You know, like some mad genius in the middle of the night? Do they just pop into your head? Hi, I'm Steve, and welcome to my portion of the Vexpo. That's Vexpo, V for Virtual Expo, Vexpo. And I'm a theme park guy. So I'm going to go with that theme of the V, and I'm not going to do a speech, I'm not going to do a talk, I'm going to do a video. V for video. V is for video. I wish it was for vaccines so we could all get everything moving again. And what will I talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about the voice and the vision. I'm going to talk about creative leadership and how a creative leader needs to have both a voice and a vision. So thanks for joining me in your homes or in your offices or wherever you are cooped up somewhere in the world in some obscene state of undress. Lucky you, I had to get dressed to do this. So I appreciate you sharing this time with me, and I'm inviting you here into my world in Orlando, and maybe later when I'm done I'll go for a kayak. But for now, I really want to share with you some thoughts about how a creative leader has to have both a voice and a vision. So enjoy. So where do ideas come from? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. And it starts in Japan, where I was working at Universal Studios Japan, leading a team in Osaka. So when I was working at Universal Studios Japan, I was asked to come here to Universal Orlando to lead a new project, to be the creative director of an amazing project, a real dream come true. So I came here and I was told that my role was to be the voice and the vision of the project. Well, that sounds cool, doesn't it? Sounds awesome, amazing, and it turns out it is. Also turns out it's a lot of work. So what does that mean exactly, to be the voice and the vision of the project? So here's what it means. If you are to lead a group of people and you want big things to happen, you have to have a vision. And you have to have a voice to let people know what that vision is. Because the vision tells you where you're going and how awesome it's going to be when you get there. But in order to articulate that, in order to enlist other people in this endeavor, you have to have a voice, and you have to clearly articulate why it's awesome, what it is that you're doing, and how you're going to get there. That creates a fertile field, and from that field, ideas spring forth. And it takes lots of people thinking about the problem in the same way in order for these ideas to be generated. People have written a lot of books. Where do ideas come from? People have asked this question over and over again of great creative minds. And the answer is simple. Think about it. Think about great visionary leaders. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be Steve Jobs. It could be Walt Disney, Oprah Winfrey, Frank Gehry, Steven Spielberg, any of them. All great visionary leaders came up with lots of great ideas, brilliant minds. But think about all of the decisions that had to be made, all of the ideas that had to be generated every day to make happen the magic that they've created. Do you think Walt Disney engineered all those rides? Do you think Frank Gehry picked out every piece of hardware and every door in every one of his buildings? Do you think Oprah Winfrey wrote every article in her magazine? Did she write every script for every piece of content on her network? No, that's not how it works. But in order really to make them come to life, there are lots of ideas that come together that supplement the vision and flesh it out and bring it to life. And those ideas, those are the important ideas, because that's what brings the vision to reality. Those ideas come from other people. And so that's where ideas come from. When I went to leadership camp in high school, there was a guy by the name of Mr. Phil. I never have forgotten his words all these decades later. Mr. Phil said these very simple yet profound words, that people support what they themselves create. And you need supporters. So engage people in the creation of your vision, and you will find those supporters. All right, now you're saying to yourself, Steve, I get it. This voice and vision, this is really important. I see what you're saying. It totally makes sense. But my question is, how do I get there? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because now I'm going to tell you. So what I'd like to do, and if you remember anything from what I've said here today, it's this leadership tip, is TIP, tip, TIP. So the T is for transparency. You've got to be honest. The I is for inclusion. You need to make a safe environment so that everybody can be included. And the P is for problem solving. You need to be focused on finding solutions. So TIP is what creative leadership is all about. So in more detail, let's go through them 1, 2, 3. TIP. If you're going to ask people to go on a journey like this, they have to trust you. They have to know what they're doing is safe, it's been tested, and that while the journey is going to be exciting, it's going to have its ups and downs, they have to know there's trust. They have to be secure. And the way you do that is by telling the truth. That's the only way you do that. You have to tell people the truth. You have to tell them what you know when you know it, and you can only earn that by doing it over and over again and consistently every time. And the tough part about it, one slip up, you've lost them. So that is very essential. So the second key to great leadership is inclusion. The I stands for inclusion. And how do you do that? You invite everyone into the process. You let them feel as though it's safe. Safety is the key. It has to be a safe place where everyone feels they can contribute their ideas and there's no repercussions if they have a bad idea or if they contradict somebody else's idea. And there's a great book by Ed Catmull, the president of Pixar, called Creativity, Inc. And sometimes there's an edge trimmer that goes off and you just have to keep going. So in this book, he talks about what makes Pixar a successful creative organization. And I think everybody would agree that Pixar is a very successful creative organization. And he says it's because everybody at the company feels safe to contribute their ideas. Everybody in the organization feels safe about talking to everybody else in the organization. Whether or not that's actually true for Pixar, I don't know, but the results do attest to the fact that Pixar is certainly a successful creative organization. I firmly believe that if everybody in an organization feels safe talking to everybody else, and if there's a problem to be solved, everybody feels free about contributing their ideas, then that allows for the best ideas to rise to the surface. And the third and most important key to great creative leadership is problem solving. You've got to find a solution, and there are a million ideas inside of everybody's brain, and it's up to you to curate those and bring the best ideas forward. And how do you do that? It's not about picking your favorite color, and people think creative directors they're just picking something they saw recently or something they really love. And those are used for grist for the mill, they're inspiration, but it's up to you to hone in what is the problem you're trying to solve. And it always comes from how are human beings going to use what you've created, and what's the best solution to make it accessible to them and make it meaningful to them and giving them an emotional experience that's satisfying. And so you need to solve a problem. It's all about solutions. Another key to great leadership is sometimes the cord is so tangled up you just have to shoot without untangling all the knots. You just have to go when it's time to go. You know what I'm saying? you can't take time to take out every single knot. Sometimes, as they say in Norway, I think, I mean, maybe I'm making this up, because I used to say this, that the Norwegian people, my people, it's good enough. That's what we say, it's good enough sometimes. And the role of a creative director is to be the standard of excellence, but sometimes you have to say it's good enough, because nobody's going to see those tangled cords. They're going to be off camera. A lot of people call themselves creative. What does that mean? What does it mean to be creative? What makes an organization creative? What makes a leader a good leader of a creative organization? So what does it mean to be creative? For my money, it means you make things that never existed before. But that's just a broad definition of how I see it. What I think makes a great leader of a creative team is somebody who's open to possibilities. And the way you are open to possibilities is if you are familiar with your team and you understand your team's capabilities. And in order to do that, you need to have some understanding of how they work. So if you're a leader of a creative team of technologists, for example, but you're not a technologist, go take a class in coding. If, for example, you lead a team that has traditional art skills, but that's not you, go take a painting class. Because it's not essential that you are accomplished in each and every one of the skill sets that your team members have, because if you were, why would you need a team? You do everything yourself, right? But what is important is that you speak the same language. You understand the processes and the priorities that your team members might have from the perspective of their particular skill set. Even if they're more accomplished in that skill set, and even if they're more fluent in the language than you. You might have a kick-ass illustrator, but if you understand the language, then you understand the way that person might tackle an assignment. And that way you can come to the best solutions. So sometimes the challenge is figuring out how you're going to communicate the design and figuring out what is the best deliverable to convey the essence of the idea. You might be called upon to do a deliverable that's a drawing. You might be called upon to do a deliverable that's a painting or a model. It might be best communicated as a site plan or as a bird's eye view. Or your design might end up being a 3D illustration because that best conveys what you're doing. You might do a written treatment and you might not have a writer on your staff. But if you know the capabilities of your team, you might find somebody on your team who has some experience and capability as a writer. For example, I was a stand-up comic for a lot of years.
And right about then, they'd say, who might I be speaking to? Who might you be speaking to? You might be speaking to the baby Jesus, but I doubt it.
Now, I wasn't hired for that particular skill set, but it came in handy on a lot of different teams. And so I was called upon to do pitches. The better you know what your team members are capable of, the more effective will be your leadership. And that speaks to your leadership style. If you know who's on your team, that's an effective leadership style. So I want to talk about my particular leadership style, and to do that, we are going to go to SeaWorld. What? Yeah, SeaWorld. Let's go. So what am I doing at SeaWorld? SeaWorld, it's like the only theme park in Orlando that I've never been professionally affiliated with. Although I did grow up in San Diego going to SeaWorld, so it does hold a place near and dear to my heart. But the reason I'm at SeaWorld is because I want to talk about dolphins. Dolphins? Yeah, I want to talk about dolphins. And the reason I want to talk about dolphins is because in my interview for this job that I currently have, when I met with the head of the organization, he said to me, Steve, tell me about your leadership style. And I said, sure, it's like a dolphin. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads. And he's like, well, what do you mean, a dolphin? I said, well, you know. And he's like, no, I don't know. And I said, well, dolphins are lateral learners. So, silverback gorillas, their style of leadership is to be the silverback gorilla. It's genetic. They're the biggest, they're the strongest, they're in charge. And I'm not the biggest, and I'm not the strongest. I'm like a dolphin. And dolphins, they are lateral learners. So vertical learners, they learn from the previous generation. Their parents teach them everything they need to know. And nothing against dolphin parents, they teach their kids plenty. But dolphins also learn from their peers. So they learn laterally. And so a dolphin can learn things, and I'll give you an example, which I think is really interesting. There's something called shelling, and it's one of the few examples in the animal kingdom where an animal, a non-human animal, as Jane Goodall used to say when I worked in Animal Kingdom, it was always a non-human animal. I'm like, Jane, we get it. So, any event, the dolphins do this thing called shelling, where they will chase a fish into an empty shell. They will then use their bottlenose dolphins, they will use those snouts to lift the shell to the surface of the water and shake the shell and extricate the fish and eat the fish. That's how they hunt for food. And so this technique of shelling is one of the few examples in the animal kingdom where an animal will use a tool and it's behavior that he or she has learned from a peer. They don't learn this from their parents, and it's not instinctual. They learn it from their friends. Dolphins are organized into groups. Those groups are called pods. And what's really interesting about dolphins is that they are not in the same pod or group or school for life. They're not always with their family. Sometimes they go off and they form new groups with different friends. They can change those pods that they're in over the course of a day. They can be in different groups. So they split apart and they come back together. It's called fission fusion. So they go off, they split up, and they fuse with the new group. Fission fusion is how creative teams work. You go off and you do different projects with different teams. You organize with different people who have different skill sets and different interests. And so I think dolphins are analogous to the way that we form teams. So I've gotten to do a lot of cool things in my 28 years with Disney. I worked on every single Disney park prior to Shanghai Disneyland, including this one. Back in 1998 when Animal Kingdom opened up, I was a writer on the project. I wrote a lot of stories for the park. I wrote a lot of fun gags for Dino Land, which Newsweek magazine called a treasure trove of comic minutia. So that was rewarding. Obviously, I still remember that. That was 1998. And so it's nice when people recognize your work. So remember that feeling so that you can then give that to your teammates, because you need to recognize their work. Because people, whatever they say, they need that feedback, that positive feedback. And besides, it's just the decent thing to do. Where do a lot of these ideas of mine about being the voice and the vision come from? They coalesced, a lot of them did, when I was leading a team in Japan. So let's go back there and talk about that. So here I am back in Japan, and so I want to share with you some things I learned in Japan. You have to have a vision. This means you have to know where you're going, and you have to know what it's going to be like when you get there. And you have to have a voice because you have to explain it to people. You have to explain it to people who are going to give you money to make this thing. You have to explain it to people who are going to be working on it so they can get excited. Because in order for people to invest their time and to really get their best work, they have to get it. They have to know what the vision is. They have to see what the realization of this dream is going to look like. And you have to paint that picture for them every day so that in those times when things are rough and you can't see how you're going to get there, they have somebody telling them, no, this is where we're going. It's going to be amazing. Don't forget that, because that's what we're all working towards. And that's how you enlist people in these enterprises. And that's how you be a creative leader. So when I got to Japan, and I needed some additional help, and I needed to find designers, I would go to design schools to find the greatest talent. Well, it turns out not everybody in Japan wanted to be a theme park designer. In fact, they didn't even know the job existed. They all wanted to work for companies that would make anime or manga or video games. So I made this video to kind of express to them how cool it is what we do, how fun it is and interesting, and how we're all very story-based in our approach. So here, watch this video that I made to get a better understanding of what the work was like there in Osaka. When I was 9 years old, I went to Universal Studios as a guest with my parents. And I remember very distinctly, there was an area there which was a Mexican village, and there's a flash flood that's released, and this water was pouring down the hill toward the tram, and I remember thinking, somebody made this up. It was somebody's job to actually just make this up from nothing. And I remember thinking to myself, that would be the coolest job in the world.
いろんな国の文化、考え方が融合していろんなものが作り上げられていく、そこが面白いなと思います。
全然違う視点からこんな解決方法があるよっていうことを教えてくれることがあるので、それがすごいもう毎日感動の連続ですよね。
First start with the story, and then everything branches out from the story. So the story is like kind of our like foundation, and then from there we can build whatever awesome stuff we want to on top of that.
それぞれがみんな自分の得意な専門分野を持ってテーマパークを作っていくという同じ目的に進んでいるので。
I'm surrounded by world-class artists.
外国人の方とかたくさんいて、考え方とか、あと働いてる空気感とか雰囲気とかが私には合ってるなと思ってます。
デザインスタジオって実はすごい特殊なところで、ゼロから自分たちの気持ち、自分たちの全ての思いを込めながら作っていける。
ユニバーサル・スタジオっていうのはやはりいろんな IP 決め事があって、でその世界観をどう作り込んでいくのか。
やっぱ構想段階が一番楽しいですよね。このテーマやったらこんなことできるんじゃないかとか、あれしたら面白いんじゃないか。自分のデザインがたくさんの人に見てもらえる場を作れる機会に出会えるっていうのはすごくいいなと。
When I heard the name Japan, it's a Universal Studios Japan, I was like, this is it. This is it. This is gonna be my nerd dream coming true.
もともとゲーム会社だったから今テーマパークという、似てるところはたくさんあるんですけど、テーマパークはもうなんだその物理的なものだったり、その空間をどういうふうに操ってお客さんを喜ばせるっていうのは、ゲームとはだいぶ違うし、作ったものを使ってるゲストさんを直接見ることが、すごくやっぱり楽しいなと私は思います。
それはやっぱり好きなことをやる人間はやっぱり強いですよね。その好きなことをやって自分の中に積み上げていくもの、そっちの方がバリューとしては価値としてはあると思う。
We have great mentorship here. The experienced members of the team really take it upon themselves to nurture the creative talent and the vision of young artists, and I feel like I'm just starting on that journey.
グラフィックデザインというカテゴリーを超えて、いろんな年代からいろんな世代からチームワークっていうのがすごい分かるようなデザインスタジオになるんじゃないかなと思います。
大きな目的っていうか働く生きがいみたいなところは、誰かのすごい思い出に残る一日に貢献できていることかなって思います。
You work for theme park, so you gotta have fun.
いつも意識しているのは2001年のオープニング3月の31日にゲストが体験したと同じような素晴らしい経験を15年経とうと20年経とうとできるようなパークにいつも、クオリティを保つこと、全てを維持することがやっぱりブランドガーディアンの仕事かなと。
There are people whose profession is to make things up that happen in theme parks. And we are the luckiest people on earth that we get to make our own dreams come true by helping other people live their dreams. Okay, I said this was Japan. Well, not exactly. Korean barbecue, but the closest I got right now. So I've said that ideas come from other people. That's kind of my thesis. Inspiration also comes from other people. It comes from things that have existed before. If you think about great artists, and it's laid out in this series of videos called Everything is a Remix, where the creator of these videos talks about how art is a combination of things that have existed before. So musicians play upon other music. Filmmakers play upon other films, writers play upon other stories, and architects are inspired by other buildings. We're all inspired by things that have been created previously. So how do we get exposed to these ideas, and how do we know which ones to inspire us in which moments? Well, if we only base it on our own experience, and if we think all our ideas are going to come from this place inside the deep crevices of our brain, we're going to end up on a circular loop. We're going to end up coming up with the same ideas we came up with yesterday that weren't satisfactory. And we might enjoy this ride because it's comfortable and we've been there before, but we need to get outside of our own sphere of influence. So there's a lot of things in the world that we're all interested in. So how do we find out about these things? Well, we read books, we look them up on the internet, we read articles. And there's always somebody out there who knows more about it than you do. So let's talk to them. I do a series of videos for the team called Creative Inspiration, where I frequently talk to people about these topics that I think are interesting and I think will apply to things that interest the team. So for example, if I'm interested in the topic of biomimicry, there's somebody who knows what that is and can explain it to me. And so I'll ask them. And so tell everybody, what the hell is biomimicry?
So biomimicry is this approach to problem solving and exploring innovation that looks to nature and natural systems as a way of deriving solutions to different problems.
I read an article on liquid cities, which talks about the connection between the Osaka Expo in the 70s and the movie Blade Runner. And it was really interesting, so I had the author of that article talk to the team.
If you look at the metabolist era, architecture itself also becoming more narrative, more temporal, more interested in process of change, and opening itself, in fact, to the idea of computer simulation.
So I read this book on Explore Tourism, and I had some theories about how it connected to theme park design. So I asked the author, and she came on and explained it to us.
And if you think about going to the theme parks, there's always this kind of big entrance. There's that idea that you're stepping through that doorway, that portal into something, and we see that in all the great stories too, like Harry Potter.
A lot of what we do is magic. And so I asked a magician to come on and talk.
Look at it. Don't let me see it. Think of just the card.
Okay.
I can see it through the screen. You cut the cards, you shuffle the cards. You're in Florida. I'm in Los Angeles. There's no way I could have known this.
This is correct.
I'm going to read your mind. 9 o'clock.
There is no way. There is no way. The world is changing in terms of performances, live entertainment. And so I asked a comedian to talk about how she was dealing with this.
To have that canceled, essentially, as like I've lost work. We're up to May where I've lost all my cancellations, but that's fine. I'd rather be safe. I'd rather everyone be safe than I eat lentils and rice for a couple of months. I got this. I got this, Tatum.
People on our own team have things that inspire them, whether it's building their own airplane.
It's a very well-proven design.
But you are, from engineering and safety, so I trust that that's going to be a priority.
Absolutely.
Or they're really interested in music, which is relevant to a lot of what we do.
And a lot of the things that I've been able to work on have a very significant musical through line, which is something I'm really passionate about.
Now, Mike, you've made the segue already, so congratulations. I know. Whether it's talking about design, there's a lot to talk about, I think, right there.
There really is. We could talk about this for days.
game design. How does game design fit into this big picture of what we're doing?
And so I started to glean information from the Imagineers and how they worked, and started to apply it to how I made video game design.
And so you have to reach out to people beyond your sphere of influence, because you'll find different perspectives that will inform your problems. And what we're dealing with as designers are problems. And it's the architect Zaha Hadid who said, know what it is that you're trying to find out. And that is the essence. We are, as designers, solving a problem. And the problem generally revolves around what is the guest, what is the person, what is the experience of a physical place? What is the experience? What is the relationship between that human being and that place? And there are problems in order to give that person, the user, the guest, an emotional experience. It's always an emotional experience. It's usually told through story because that gives us great access to people's emotions. And so you've got a problem in front of you. And every day there are thousands of problems, but you have to know what problem you're trying to solve. Because sometimes you're solving for one problem when you really should be solving for another problem. So the key is figuring out what is the problem. And in order to see what the problem is, sometimes you have to get outside your own sphere. And that's where inspiration comes into play. And we have to get inspiration from as many different sources as we can to keep things fresh and to keep us from going in circles. So that was my talk on the voice and the vision. And that's it. That's what I had to say. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Expo. And maybe I'll see you around sometime, live and in person.